To borrow and then entirely misuse a famous expression, in space, no one can hear you scream about how much you wish you were dead. That might seem like a really odd sentiment, and you're right, I have done better intros, but the point is that in the deep, terrifying black of the unknown, there are a lot of things that will make you pray for a swift end. Now, despite being really big on the perils of interstellar exploration, Star Trek does take its position as family-friendly entertainment very seriously, and thus gives the really bleak stuff a wide berth. One day they're gonna let me do the 10 worst things that could possibly happen to you in Star Trek, but today, my friends, is sadly not that day. Instead, we're going to look at the worst things that have happened in Star Trek, and specifically, events that either would, should, or could lead their victims to resent their continued existence. My name is Adam Cleary, and these are 10 Star Trek fates worse than death. Number 10, being trapped forever. Losing Data has haunted Jean-Luc Picard for 20 years, and when he began his own series recently, his blown-up old pal began appearing in his dreams. Thus, the entire first season is split 50-50 between saving Data's legacy and just sort of sitting through some really awkward sexual tension between Jamie and Cersei Romulan here. Anyway, the last episode revealed that while Data's body was destroyed in the final moments of Nemesis, his consciousness continued to exist in a simulation. That sounds nice, but ultimately he's entirely alone in a prison of his own mind. He is trapped forever, and all he wants to do is to finally be destroyed, like he was supposed to be, with the explosion, you remember. Picard finally meets him in this simulation after he too perishes, and the pair reminisce about their time together on board the Enterprise. It's during this meeting that Data asks his captain to turn the bloody thing off on his way out, finally allowing Data to die. It's a tearjerker, sure, but the alternative was letting him sit alone in that dusty room, listening to Willie Nelson for all eternity. Number 9, having someone's Katra shoved into your brain. We've all seen The Wrath of Khan. Kirk and his old adversary finally get their dicks out on the table, measure them up, and while the Enterprise takes a pounding in the process, it ultimately prevails. However, being a pretty sore loser if you ask me, Khan tries to explode everyone. In a blind panic, Spock rushes to the engine room, but McCoy attempts to stop him. A pinch, a mind meld, and the word "remember" later, and suddenly someone in engineering begins chopping the biggest space onions you've ever seen as Kirk watches his best friend die right in front of him. However, not to be outdone, Spock has actually uploaded his mental self into McCoy's mind prior to his own death. A smart idea, except Bones did not deal particularly well with it. The whole experience drove him mad, nearly killed him, and if there'd been no way to get him back out again, he'd have promptly gone out the nearest airlock. Number 8, being assimilated by the Borg. As we all know, Sweden's most terrifying military force operates entirely as a collective. Assimilation into it works from the inside out as nanoprobes are injected into a victim's bloodstream. Once inside, the transformation begins immediately, and within a few minutes, all individuality is lost. Now, while that has proved numerous times to not be entirely permanent, even if someone does come back from being a Borg, they never quite come back all the way. 7 of 9 always had a distinct air of drone about her, and even our poster boy for post-assimilation prosperity, Jean-Luc Picard, has been haunted by his experiences ever since. In fact, knowing what he knows, Jean-Luc has been a big advocate of friends don't let friends who've been assimilated keep living, ordering his crew to shoot on sight any of their colleagues who've begun the process. Death, he deemed, was a preferable fate. Number 7, being trapped in a transporter for 75 years, only to be lost for eternity. In the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Relics, the Enterprise stumbles across a Dyson sphere which, and I've not had time to check my notes, absorbs all energy in a solar system with no loss of suction. Lo and behold though, there's not only been a ship yeeted into its surface, but Scotty, yes the actual Scotty, has been hiding in its transporter pattern buffer for 75 entire years. After bringing him back to the materialized world though, he finds himself a relic of a bygone age and a bit of a liability for the rest of the crew. While his ensuing fish out of water story is a harrowing one, it's absolutely nothing compared to the fate of his accomplice, Ensign Matt Franklin, who, despite getting suspended in the buffer for 3/4 of an entire century, disintegrates 53% before being lost entirely. That is awful. Number 6, winding up a transporter duplicate and getting marooned as a result. Now, if you think that's the worst thing that can happen to you in a transporter, then oh my sweet space summer child, you are both precious and wrong. In the Next Generation episode, Second Chances, Riker leads an away team to a decaying outpost only to discover, well, himself. I'll not bore you with the technicals, but the pattern bounced back off a cloud or something and rematerialized on the surface while simultaneously reaching the ship. Will got a big fat promotion and went on to be Starfleet's premier shagger, while the other Will got marooned and spent the next 8 years in a hole. If the solitary isolation wasn't bad enough, getting rescued only to find that your duplicate has broken up with your girlfriend for you and, in your eyes, ruined your entire life definitely is. Thomas, as he decided to then call himself, wound up voluntarily surrendering to the Cardassians when last we saw him, and if that's not going to make you wish your pattern had just degraded, then nothing is. Number 5, being split into a good half and an evil half. Yeah, right, so getting split into 2 identical versions of yourself sucks, yes, but getting split into 2 exact opposites is pretty much the last thing you want to happen from a duplication standpoint. However, in The Enemy Within, Captain Kirk goes through that exact nightmarish hell. Split into 2 separate people, one who represents everything that was good about him and one who represents everything that was bad. While good Kirk was pretty much just normal Kirk, if a bit of a drip, bad Kirk was horrendous. He stole things, he got drunk, he tried to force himself on Yeoman Rand. I don't mind sticking my neck out here, bad Kirk was a dick. Mercifully, the 2 were finally fused back together into one just slightly problematic Kirk. Number 4, being flung across the galaxy. When you stop for a moment and think about it, the entire premise of Star Trek Voyager is a fate worse than death. Yeah, okay, it just about worked out alright for everyone involved, but if they'd not found a series of shortcuts, it would have been very bad. Very, 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 very bad. Think about it. That 75-year return journey time was based on them never so much as stopping for a bathroom break, meaning the actual time was probably at least double that. The only way you are going to run a starship for 150 years is if you start deliberately breeding the crew to produce new officers. Not a single person on board signed up for that, and not a single child they would have birthed could have had any aspirations beyond its own bulkheads. Whatever way you want to spin it, that is not a life. That is a life sentence, and one more than a few folks would have, let's just say, opted out of. Number 3, contracting a space disease that devolves you. Space plagues are all the rage in Star Trek, but the one seen in Genesis is categorically the most banter. You know, Dr. Crusher just sort of like accidentally triggers all of Lieutenant Barclay's dormant introns and causes every single ancestral T cell in his body to activate, which leads to an unstoppable airborne virus that regresses the crew to their species' respective prehistoric states. You know the drill. Worf being a Klingon, he gets hot, aggressive and spitty. Troy runs a bath and just decides she'd rather, live in it. All the humans regress back to being Neanderthals, and for reasons that aren't really fully explained, Reg turns into a huge spider. Anyway, could go on and on about the philosophical questions that raises and arguments about how scientific advancement ultimately always walks a tightrope of social catastrophe, but instead, I'll just say that if you ever see me growing that sort of monobrow, I'd want you to dispose of me humanely. Number 2, breaking the warp 10 speed limit only to evolve into something. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. The only thing worse than genetically de-evolving backwards into some kind of lower life form is genetically super evolving forwards into, what is this? A big fish thing with fingers and a twirly mustache? The threat of spending between 75 and 150 years lost in space is enough to drive anyone to do ill-advised things, but perhaps none so ill-advised as trying to break the Warp 10 barrier. Under Janeway's behest, though, that's exactly what Tom Paris does, with amphibious consequences. Not only does it work, but breaking the limit comes with the added bonus of speeding up his evolution at a rate millions of times faster than nature would normally allow. Does he grow a big brain? Does he develop ESPN? Does he transcend this mortal plane to a state of godlike omnipotence? Nope, he just turns into a big fish thing with fingers and a twirly mustache. Number 1, just being Helix. No, it's a joke. I'm kidding. I'm mostly kidding. Number 1, being a cosmic god whose power is stripped away. Q. Star Trek's greatest guest character and a creature who either was a god or whose powers were sufficiently amazing that you just naturally assume he was a god. Either way, a man who was firmly tipped beyond cleanliness on that scale your grandmother used to mention to you. However, in the episode Deja Q, he shows up at yet another inopportune time, naked on the bridge of the Enterprise, and God, if I had $1. He reveals that he was stripped of all his powers due to, well, using them to be a dick, and got the old banhammer from the Continuum. Having to live as a scared, hungry, tired, useless, mortal human being for so much as 2 whole days is enough for him to hijack a shuttle and career headfirst into this chandelier that would like nothing better than to end his entire existence. Yes, being a person is fine for the likes of me and you, but once you've suckled deep at the teat of omnipotence, then it's either that or death. So there you have it, those are 10 Star Trek fates worse than death, read to you by a man for whom the only fate worse than death is being assigned every Lwaxana Troi episode ranked worst to best. Let us know what you made of it all in the comments below. Of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. This has been Trek Culture. I've been Adam Cleary, and we'll all see you soon. Goodbye.